What's up, my brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Fireground Fitness Podcast, where we talk about all things pertaining to life on and off the fireground. The views and the opinions expressed are those of your host and our guest. Today, I'm sitting down with Chris Stewart to do part 2 of strategic decision making. Specifically today, we are going to be diving into Size Up. All about Size Up, all the component parts. Tune in and enjoy. All right. So if you listened to the first installment, we kind of talked about why the SDM is important, why strategic decision making as a tool needs to be applied on the fireground in order to be effective and to save lives. And we want to dive into some of the parts of it, and we're going to start right at the very beginning. And I've got my guest back with me, Chris Stewart, sitting right across from me. So Stu, let's talk about Size Up. What does, when I throw the word size up on the table, what does that mean to you?
Well, so I'm a definition kind of guy, and I get frustrated not knowing and understanding definitions, or firefighters or students or whatever, are confused about definitions or what something really means. So size up is about measuring the problem, or measuring or assessing what is happening in front of us, right? So size up is truly about that assessment of an incident in order for us to apply the most important action, or the most critical action that's centered around our tactical objectives. So size up is a measurement of the problem in a rough sense. So it's our ability to assess the issues present, because in any problem-solving matrix or mechanism, if you do not understand the problem, there's a good chance you are going to suck in the solutions to the problem, right? So this is really, really important, and it's actually very easy, it's actually very simple. But simple doesn't always mean easy, right? And so there's a lot that goes into this. And in my experience, one of the more enlightening issues I've come across is when in teaching a tactics and strategy class, there'd be 100 students over a couple nights, and you would ask the question pretty early on in class is, okay, what is size up? And we'd get a bunch of different answers, and mostly close. And then we'd decide on, no, this is exactly what the answer. By the way, this is what it says on the internets. You pull out the as Khrushchev will say, the Funk and Wagnall dictionary and look up these. So we come to this definition that we agree upon as what size up is within the context of what we're doing. And then the second part of that is, okay, how do you do it? Does everybody here know how to do size up? And there's every single head is, yeah. Okay, explain it to me. And when they explain it, you get almost 100 different answers, right? As to where they start, what's important to them, what the process is. So, and they may not all be wrong. And in fact, and oftentimes there's some degree of right. But we still have to, we need a system that helps us start the size up process in the same place, in the same manner. So we're starting from the same position, moving forward. And so we have to define what the critical elements of size up are. So we didn't have like a true definition or a true, our policies did not have that. And so there was quite a few of us, and you were very, very an important part of that with us working at the Command Training Center is, okay, how do we frame size up for everybody? How do we frame it for every individual moving forward? And we were able to utilize 3 questions that help the individual start in the same place. And those questions are, what is the problem, right? Like clear, get to, cut to the heart of the issue. What's going on here, right?
Yes, simply stated.
Yeah, as simply actually as you can.
Yeah.
What is the problem? What's getting in the way of me achieving the tactical objectives? Meaning, is there something here that's present connected to the conditions, connected to the problem, or the problem is creating these, that where it's going to make it excessively difficult or risky for me to get an all clear. Do we have structural integrity issues? Do we have a large volume of fire? Do we have significant access challenges? Really important things that are fundamental to us getting inside, getting water on the fire, and getting an all clear. And so what is getting in the way of achieving those tactical objectives? Was the second question. And the third question is there something right now that if I don't deal with it right this second, it's going to hurt or kill me? Like, am I going to walk into the building falling on me, or the front of the building falling on me, or is there something very obvious? And I don't want it should be very obvious, right? It shouldn't be things that are third, fourth order consequences. Well, if I don't do all these things, then that could be really bad over there. No. Right this second, if I act right now, is there something that's going to hurt that I need to be worried about hurting or killing me? And so, again, we're not trying to make this more complicated, but if everybody starts from the same position and asks the same questions at the beginning of size up, we are more likely to develop that common operating picture where we all understand, because the backside of this is communication, right? And the ability to communicate what's going on, the ability to communicate what we're doing. And so if we start in the same place, we likely will have that common operating picture using a common language which drives better understanding of everybody on the fire ground. So size up is all of that in a nutshell. And it's really about helping us define the problem. And how serious is the problem? How big is the problem? And how much work is it going to take to manage the problem?
So the thing that I want to add to that is the question that always comes to my mind is, when does this process begin? And so I think in a lot of us, it's like, oh, when I pull up and I look out the windshield and I have eyes on the immediate issue. But for me, this really begins, you could go way back, right? It begins at, knowing your first due and understanding. And I believe that some of that's true, right? Some of the reconnaissance
How
you
my
do.
parents raised me. Let's go back then.
Right. So when you talk about, like, you're in your first due, you're recognizing some of the hazards that are existing, that are latent, sitting out in your first due, right? So that when an address drops and the tones come in and you're like, oh, I know that place, right? You've begun to size up that structure and some of the access issues you might face, et cetera, right? Your awareness is high level. And then it's, I'm listening to the dispatch, right? What information am I gathering from what's being reported? And then once you pull onto the apron, right? Is there a header on the skyline? What does that tell you about what's taking place? And, does it match the initial dispatch? And then you're listening to radio traffic and orienting yourself to who's going to be responding in and what orders, et cetera. And are you hearing, if you're coming in second, third, are the first due trucks, what information are they sharing in their initial reports when they get on scene? All of that information is feeding your ability to make decisions when you pull up, and now you look out the windshield and you're trying to match. Does that match? Is what I'm seeing on the fire ground match all the information I've gathered thus far as I'm on my way in? So I think we have to consider that our size up is not an isolated event one time. Right? It's a constant gathering process as you're working your way toward an incident. And if you're sitting in the back, I would submit to you that you need to be thinking about where you're headed and what you're getting yourself into, right? Start sizing it up, thinking about hose line deployment. What line am I going to pull based on the size of the event that we're heading into? That is part of the decision-making process. You need to start working through those variables en route to the event, right? From the minute the tones are dropping.
Going back to the question of when does size up begin? Size up begins as soon as you're notified of the incident. So you're dispatched, right? And there's actually a pretty quick process here. Is, like you said, if I've done my work or I've had time to do my pre-work, to my first due and all this, do I know this address or don't I? If I do, I follow this course of, I have some preconceived notion and ideas about what I could experience there, and it's going to help me make decisions. And then if I don't know anything about the address, then I need to take things at face more of a face value and use them and pay attention more closely for clues so that I can make a proper decisions when I arrive, when I actually can see what's going on there. So that when does it start? You set yourself up with by doing pre-planning and pre-work, but we don't always have that luxury. And when we don't have that luxury, that you got to rely on the process. That the process is important regardless, but it's almost, I would say it's almost a little bit more important when you don't have any familiarity with where you're going.
Yeah. Hey, that's a really important point, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you've worked every first due, you've seen every structure, you know every risk? Like, that's just not a realistic thing. Of course, I throw that out there as a would be nice, right?
Sure.
But you get roved in, you're working overtime, you head into or you get presented with a scenario you just didn't expect,
right?
And you haven't gamed this one yet, right? For yourself, so you roll into this incident and have to make decisions sight unseen. So yeah, that's a really important thing, right? And that's where looking out your windshield and gathering that information and intelligently making a decision is so critical, and that's why this process is so important. So what are the variables, right? We talk about the fireground factors when you're looking at the incident. Well, let me go back here for a second. When you talk about, let's go through this process of what the problem is. Are you considering the fireground factors when you think about that?
So I think it's important to talk about size up and the critical factors separately, because the way I use it, the way I've processed it, and the way I've taught it is that size up helps you figure out what the critical factors are, right? So the identifying what the problem is, being able to simply state the problem, and recognizing the challenges with in front of me with achieving the tactical objectives and anything that could kill me. When I've got a decent picture of that, it's going to allow me to figure out what is actually critical, what the critical factors are about this incident right here in front of me. So size up is the measurement process. The critical factors are a way of simplifying what's actually going on here and simplifying what elements are critical, they're not all critical every incident, right? In fact, rarely are they all critical. And I would say if they are all critical, you have bigger problems, right? Because the old saying of when everything is critical, nothing is critical. And so you've got to really define now where you're going to start. And if everything's critical, there's no starting point. It's like the unsolvable problem, right? So we have to be able to define that. No matter how bad it is that measurement. And then, all right, let's look at these critical elements. Let's define what they are, because I'm focusing there first.
Right. What I love about the fireground factors is, to your point, is they're not always a factor, right? Sometimes they are a non-factor, which is identifying your critical non-factors is important too. Hey, I don't have to, this structure, conventionally framed, really robust, everything looks intact. I'm not worried about the building, right? That's not my problem. But if I have a front door open, I have heavy smoke blowing out the back and an obvious flow path, okay, that's a problem I need to be concerned with. How is the fire evolving and developing, etc.? So I think it's important to understand the fireground factors so that you can take into consideration those variables. Again, it's a blink of an eye, and the more you understand those factors, the more they're going to assist you in your decision making. So
yeah, and they're just criteria, right? They're eight high level factors, but there can be many components to all of them, and some part of it is critical and other parts are not. I don't want us to have to pigeonhole the criticality of conditions or things on an incident just to these 8 categories. Sometimes it doesn't quite fit, or sometimes somebody's not quite sure. Well, just say what it is. If you think it's a critical factor, say what it is. You don't have to put it neatly into one of these categories, even though you probably could, right? But just say what it is. Hey, we have heavy fire on the front of this house, and it's involving all the means of egress on the front of this house. Well, that's That's fire. That's fire. That's fire and life safety, quite honestly. That fits into both of those critical factors. So rather than, trying to parse this whole thing out and to put it in a nice, neat box, just say what it is. This is a critical factor to me right now. And that helps. I think a lot of times that helps us become a little bit more swift and become a little bit more comfortable with what that is. Because, again, this is meant to be used on the fire ground. This isn't meant to be just an academic discussion by people sitting around a kitchen table.
Right.
This is actually a usable tool. So we can argue afterwards whether that was life safety or whether that was fire critical factor. No, the fact was that's what we had going on, and it mattered to us right then and there.
Right. So let's talk about these broadly for a second. The 8 factors. So when we talk about fire and smoke, clearly the concern with fire and smoke is, like in this particular case, we're talking about firefighting and making decisions on the fire ground. So that is obviously going to be our primary concern, right? And so many times we hear people say things like, there's heavy smoke. But does that really define the problem, right? For you as an individual, can you sit back and go, well, I saw a lot of heavy smoke? Or it really boils down to understanding what the dynamics are that are taking place on the fire ground, right? What does that heavy smoke mean to you? The volume, velocity, density, color. What does it look like? What is it doing? Where is it going? Is there a deflagration imminent? Sorry, I had to throw that in there. So is there a big...
I don't even know what that is, but I hope I don't ever see one.
Yeah, sounds bad. So is there an event that is seeded, and we're looking at the smoke that's telling us what that's going to look like, right? And we're like, oh, something bad's about to happen. How do we know that? Because we're reading the smoke, and those conditions are telling us something. So when you think about like the building, what comes to your mind as concerns?
Size, complexity, and its state of decay, right? Is it intact? Is it going to allow me to work inside of it, or isn't it, right? And that complexity thing is, how big is it actually inside? Is it something where I should reasonably be able to search, or is it some place where searching is futile? If it's a grocery store, searching in a grocery store is absolutely futile and a waste of time. So I need to make some decisions about that. And again, it's helping me drive to some action on the fire ground and things that are connected directly to the tactical objectives. And then I look at how the building's put together, the materials. Because if I show up on a mid-rise and we have a fire and an occupancy, which we had a couple days ago, is that a wood-framed mid-rise with a sprinkler system? Or is it a block and concrete mid-rise that has been sitting in our city for 50 years and with a much lower concern for me with fire extension and that building's not going to fall down because the building material is combustible.
Right.
Where in the Type 5 wood-framed mid-rise, it is.
Right. It's eventually going to decay and come apart, right?
So and whether there's a sprinkler system or not, I still have to be worried about that. So there's things like that and that matter to us in that initial size up of the building, and the experience part of this helps you be faster at identifying whether that's an issue to me right this second or it's not.
Right. Yep. So I'm going to turn on to life safety. So when I think about life safety, we look at an occupancy, and the question that comes to my mind is, what is the probability that there's somebody in here? So I think about in a residential neighborhood, a single family dwelling, you're going to have a high probability there's somebody there versus like an auto zone at 3 a.m, right? The probability is very low. And then the next thing that comes to me is looking at the fire and the conditions. What is the likelihood that there's tenable spaces in there? And is there somewhere that someone very well could be survivable inside that space? And the last thing to me, when it comes to the life safety component, is our capability for effecting rescue. Am I there by myself as the 1st Duke Battalion Chief? Or do I have a crew of folks stacked up waiting to effect a change on this event that can help us make this happen? And again, it's all about making decisions on the fire ground, right? Is life safety a concern for me? Or is this a vacant structure where I'm using life safety as an excuse to go do dangerous things, right? Or am I making a real value-based decision based on potential occupants that could be in there and really trying to effect a rescue?
Yeah, that's the hard part right now in the fire services. I think we are struggling with the absolutes on both sides. And as Bruno called it way back when, it's the rescue fairy tale, right? And there are, to paint the polar ends of this problem is, on one side we have people saying, well, you can never discount that somebody's not in there. Okay, so then is that a license for us to do stupid shit? No, not for me it isn't, but maybe it is for some folks. And then on the other end, the hyper safe, the hyper controlling part of the fire service says, well, we want to manage every possible risk before we engage in looking for victims, right? And is that possible? No, it's not. It simply is not. So what can we do on the inside, or excuse me, in the middle of those two things to work effectively and functionally and live to tell about it? Really is the ultimate goal, and actually make some rescues. So we're actually starting to get data now that is improving our knowledge, not only about, statistically about rescues and those types of things, but then UL just in the last week, or I think it was 2 weeks, released their residential size up and rescue study that defined a lot of things that have never been measured about victim location, victim removal, and the conditions in and around them for these given experiments they did. And then they did a ton of work on this time to task, where all of the technical panel members went back to their fire departments with a series of tasks, and they measured this kind of the average or mean of how long it takes them to remove a victim from a bedroom to the exterior. Or, and I'm oversimplifying this, but it was a ton of broken down pieces like that help them apply them now to these experiments and say, okay, based on these conditions and based how long it took, we can assume this is what the victim, or we can or hypothesize what the victim actually experienced. And based on that, what is the best thing for a victim? And so we've never had the ability to measure that. And I am far from being comfortable to explaining this report. I'm trying to spend a lot of time, and I'm trying to ask a lot of questions about it so that I can better understand it. So if we connect that to the Firefighter Rescue Survey, which Brian Brush and Nick Ledeen and that group of folks is doing, that is really starting to quantify what we didn't know about actual rescues. And we know we're not getting anywhere near the actual number and in the study. But still, there's really, really important information that's coming out of that. So it's helping us drive this perspective of life safety. And it's not always, they're always there and they're always savable, or they're never there or they're never savable. It's connecting it now to the size up and going, okay, based on what I see, what is the most reasonable thing for me to be able to do about life safety? And where do I think the people are most savable?
Yeah.
And what is searchable, right? The tenability is difficult to measure. Survivability is even harder to measure. Where do I believe they are most savable? And that has a lot to do with my ability and my action. That last question in that series of questions you went through. So it's really interesting and unique when we talk about this, because the question comes up is, the people will say, well, you can't have a life safety problem in a commercial building. Oh, really? There've never been people trapped in a commercial fire? No, that's not true. But your ability to measure where they are and your ability to do something about that is the critical part.
Right.
And there is a time you can, and there's a time you can't. The best example we had of that here in the city of Phoenix was Safeway. The fire at Safeway at 35th Avenue and Northern, right? They had a real fire that ultimately ended up burning that grocery store to the ground. where we made, I will call them rescues in the beginning of that, not in a search and rescue smoky environment, pull them out kind of way, but they have a fire in the back, a gas-fed fire in the back, and they're trying to get the occupants and the workers out. And by the way, they're providing resistance. They're like, yeah, no, we can't leave. Things are fine. No, you better go now. And they literally got those folks out with fire rolling over their head in the last few seconds to make that difference. So it's not a simple. They're always there, and I'm going to crawl around until either I die or I can't. We don't find them. That's not reasonable. And then the fact that I have to make it so safe that I can't ever search until it's incredibly safe. It just doesn't work.
Right. I love that example about the Safeway. The thing that I always assumed, because I hadn't had that experience yet, my assumption was if a firefighter goes in and says, hey guys, the building's on fire, I need you to evacuate, they will just do it. But the reality, think about this, you got a 16-year-old kid working a cash register. He's been told that the float in that cash register is his responsibility. That's a tremendous amount of pressure on that kid. I'm not leaving this couple hundred, but I'm not responsible for that. My manager said to not leave my post because I can't leave this unsecured.
And Mrs. Smith's in line going, hey, I'm not leaving without my yogurt and my cereal and whatever it is that she needs in her life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the factors that apply on people that put pressure on them is quite remarkable and hilarious, frankly.
The store manager was on the phone, and and the company officer of Engine 930 saying, dude, you got to get out now. Come with me. And he's giving him the hand like, hold on, I'm on the phone.
Right.
You're like, well,
you've made your choice.
I'm about to kidnap you. is what really what it came down to.
Right. So we have to be. The reason this is so important is when we start sizing up the factors. Right. When we start sizing up the life safety component. Human beings do weird things, and we have to take that into consideration. Right. So we can only control so many factors here, and we have to look at what we can do to change the conditions to effect rescue. And sometimes that's an action of opportunity because we stumble across somebody and we get them out, or it's we remove the fire from the victim, or we are going in and getting the victim and getting them away from the fire, right? And we've seen examples of each one of those things. But the crux of that is making a good assessment of what is taking place on the fire ground and not making a blanket statement that, well, there could be somebody in there, so I'm going in. That's not smart firefighting. And I think at the end of the day, the pivotal pieces here, you have to make well-considered, smart decisions, not just running in there full of spit and vinegar and emotion, right? This is driven by an intellect, smart, aggressive firefighting, not just aggressive with no brains behind it.
Well, so there's two things that I have had some realization with recently about rescue and those types of things. So the first one is what is survivable and what we may have thought was survivable or was not survivable previously, and then we find out victims are coming out of places like that with those conditions and they're surviving. And then on the other side is we're seeing conditions that that don't appear very severe to us and people not surviving. So it gives us this juxtaposition as like, God dang, man, can we actually even really tell? There's a fantastic video out of Florida. I got this from Keith Stakes because he uses it in a presentation from UL, and of PD and fire guys at a house fire actually rescuing a woman who was yelling at them, and right previous to them making their way through the window into the bedroom to get her out, there's fire rolling over the top. There's fire rolling across the top of the ceiling of the bedroom, and it rolls out the window as they're taking the boards off the window. And they actually have to knock it down, go in the room, orient themselves, grab her, and get her out. And she survives. So I think in the UL terms, we would say that was the victim was in an environment that was intimate with fire, right? And she lives. And we've seen the exact opposite where people are way less serious conditions and they're not living. So that causes confusion with us, and we need to work through that. And then the other part of it is when Frank Lieb, who is the acting training chief for the FDNY, was here, and he was going to talk fire behavior with us, but he had just been the IC of that high-rise fire in the Bronx back in January, where I want to say 19 people died. They transported 60 people. It was a serious high-rise fire, and the fire was in one unit. And but as soon as even the first companies were arriving, the fire's on the second and third floor. It was a third floor apartment, but it was a 2-story unit, and that unit was the third floor, and then it was stairs down to the second floor. And there was no real access from the second floor. You came into the third floor, and then you got to go downstairs in the unit to get to where the fire was. So it's producing a ton of smoke. The door to the apartment are open into the hallway, and it's transmitting smoke throughout the building. So as soon as they show up, they are getting reports. Their dispatch center is going, okay, we've got people calling on the 10th that are trapped by smoke, people on the 15th that are trapped by smoke, and all over the building. And to the point where they're starting to think, man, we have multiple fires in the building. This can't just be the one fire. And then in that discussion, we got to the point where they finally had to push down that hallway. Getting to the fire became so critical that they had to push down that hallway and almost take that mentality that law enforcement has in a violent incident or an active shooter, where I'm going to disregard the victim, so to speak, because if I don't get to the fire and put the fire out, I'm going to have even more victims. So that paradigm has not been talked about, at least in my career and in my circles. And I'd like to think I pay attention to what's going on nationally, but we haven't had that conversation as far as I know. Not at least on a big scale. There may be of individuals. But so to me, the recognition of that is, well, there's a time and a place where I have to prioritize a fire attack over immediate victims, because if I don't, I'm going to have way more victims. If I just start dealing with the victims and I don't deal with the fire, the problem is going to get worse and it's going to impact more people. So it becomes really, really challenging. And I don't want to overcomplicate new officers in making these decisions, but they can't escape it. They can't escape the situation or the potential situation. So we've got to figure our way through it. So those are the things I'm trying to figure out how we talk about more effectively.
Well, and I think that's a great place to just come to a close on Size Up, right? There is no absolutes. There's a lot of variables and a lot of things that are dynamic, and you have to make difficult decisions based on the conditions that are present to you. And the one thing I'll say in addition to that is that as time is passing, conditions are evolving, or you're getting your hands wrapped around them, right? You're either making the problem better or the problem is escalating.
Rarely does it stay the same.
Right. So it's so important to recognize that this process, and all of this whole entire Size Up process, this whole strategic decision-making process is a continuum that repeats itself. But the Size Up piece of that is constantly ongoing. Am I making a difference? What is happening now to the structure, to the fire, to the conditions at large? Am I able to get to people? Am I not? All those different factors that go into this, and you're constantly reevaluating. So
within those variables, the constant has to be the process.
Yep.
Is that the thinking process, and we're going to start in the same place every single time.
All right. Any final thoughts on the before we move on the Size Up piece?
I think I've droned on plenty about Size Up.
Okay. That's all we have for today, folks. Thanks for listening in. Next part in the series, part 3, we're going to be talking about risk management. So make sure you stay tuned for that. In the meantime, go on out there, get some.